Right now, somewhere over the Atlantic, a plane is doing 900 kilometers an hour at 35,000 feet, carrying 280 passengers who have absolutely no idea what they're sitting inside. Not because of turbulence, not because the pilot skipped the safety briefing, but because of the plane they're on. The airline didn't buy it, they're renting it, month to month, like an apartment. And here's the part that gets weirder the more you think about it. Over half of all commercial aircraft flying today are owned not by the airline on the tail, but by a company most passengers have never even heard of. And almost all of those companies operate out of one city. One small city in one small country on the edge of Europe. Dublin, Ireland. So today, we're going to answer the questions nobody thinks to ask. If airlines don't own their planes, who does? Why does it work that way? And what does that mean for every single flight you've ever taken? Here's a number to start with. $113 million. That is what a single new Airbus A320neo costs at list price. A narrow-body workhorse. The kind of plane that flies you 2 hours on a domestic route. One plane. A wide body like the Boeing 777 or the Airbus A350, the planes doing the long hauls to New York, Dubai and Tokyo, those can go north of $350 million each. Now airlines don't just need one, they need dozens, sometimes hundreds. American Airlines operates over 900 aircraft. United flies around 950. Emirates has nearly 300, mostly wide bodies. You do the maths and the numbers become almost comical. Even a mid-size carrier buying a modest fleet of 150 aircraft is looking at a capital requirement that runs into the tens of billions of dollars, before they hire a single pilot and before they book a single passenger. But it gets worse. Even if an airline somehow had the cash, they probably can't get the planes. Boeing and Airbus, the only two mainstream manufacturers of large commercial jets in the world, are both running order backlogs that stretch close to a decade at current production rates. You order today, and you're waiting until the early 2030s to take a delivery. That is not a fleet expansion plan, that's a hostage situation. So you have two problems. The cost is enormous, and the queue is absurd. And then there's a third problem, the one nobody likes to say out loud. Aviation is not a stable business. Demand can collapse overnight. A pandemic, a geopolitical shock, a fuel price spike, a recession, a war. The industry's seen it all, repeatedly. When demand evaporates, airlines ground fleets and beg governments for survival money. Between 2020 and 2021, governments worldwide pumped over $200 billion into bailing out airlines that had purchased or heavily financed their own aircraft. Planes that were just sitting on the tarmac, losing value, going nowhere thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic's decimation of international travel. If you own the planes, you own the problem. Which is exactly why a huge chunk of the industry decided not to. Here's the alternative. Instead of writing a 9-figure check for a jet, an airline signs a lease. They pay somewhere between $400,000 and $1 million a month per aircraft, depending on the type, the age, and the market conditions. They fly it for 6 to 12 years, and then they give it back. No $100 million asset sitting on the balance sheet depreciating. No residual value risk when the model becomes outdated. No catastrophic write-down when the market turns. If a pandemic hits, the routes dry up, or a more efficient aircraft comes along, when the lease is up, you walk away. Think of it exactly like leasing a car. You pay a fixed monthly amount, drive it for a few years, hand it back, and get a newer one. No monster down payment, no long-term depreciation headache. Airlines worked out the exact same maths, just with machines that cost about 1,000 times more. Two types of leases dominate the industry. The first is a dry lease, where the airline gets just the plane. They supply the crew, the maintenance, the insurance, the entire operation. The plane lands in their hands bare. They build the operation around it. The second is called a wet lease, or more technically, an ACMI, standing for aircraft, crew, maintenance, and insurance, all bundled together. The lessor provides the whole package. This is common for startups, seasonal capacity boosts, or carriers entering new markets who need planes fast and can't wait to build an operation from scratch. Either way, the company that physically owns the plane stays almost entirely invisible. No logo on the tail, no branding in the cabin, no frequent flyer program. Just a contract, a monthly wire transfer, and a very lucrative asset sitting at 35,000 feet. To see what leasing looks like when it is executed with absolute precision, you need look no further than Indigo. Indigo launched in India in August 2006 with 1 aircraft and exactly 0 passengers. From literally day one, the founders made a decision that looked reckless on paper. They would not own their planes. They would lease almost everything, fly the jets while they were new and efficient, and return them before the expensive maintenance overhauls came due. The strategy had a surgical logic to it. India's aviation market was volatile, banking conditions were difficult, and capital was expensive. By using a sale and leaseback model, where an airline buys an aircraft at a negotiated price and immediately sells it to a lessor while leasing it back, Indigo could free up capital, keep its balance sheet light, and scale faster than any competitor tied down by ownership. They placed an order for 100 Airbus A320s as a brand new airline, then 180 more, then 250 more. Then, in June 2023, they placed the single largest aircraft order in the history of commercial aviation, 500 Airbus A320 family jets, worth $55 billion at list prices. As of mid-2025, Indigo operates around 420 aircraft, with nearly 950 more on order. They carry over 118 million passengers a year. They control more than 60% of India's domestic aviation market. They're bigger than JetBlue, bigger than Air France, approaching the scale of Southwest and Lufthansa, built in under 20 years, almost entirely by renting. There is a twist though, and it's a telling one. Indigo is now quietly shifting its model. By 2030, the airline plans to own or hold on finance lease 30 to 40% of its 600 aircraft fleet, up from around 17% today. Why? Because at scale, ownership starts making sense. The flexibility premium you pay in lease rates adds up. When you're big enough, stable enough, and cash rich enough, owning becomes cheaper over a 20-year horizon. Indigo leased to grow, now it is growing to own. The circle completes itself. So if hundreds of airlines around the world are renting planes, who are they renting from? This is where the story gets genuinely strange. Over 60% of the world's leased commercial aircraft are managed out of Ireland. An Irish leased aircraft takes off somewhere in the world every 2 seconds. Irish lessors own and manage roughly $150 billion worth of aviation assets. The biggest player, AerCap, operates out of Dublin. As of 2025, it held a portfolio of 1,676 owned aircraft, plus engines and helicopters, making it the largest owner of commercial aviation assets on the planet. Not Delta, not Emirates, not United, a leasing company most passengers have literally never heard of. SMBC Aviation Capital, second in the rankings with 761 aircraft, is Japanese owned but also based in Dublin. Avalon, third with 583 aircraft, is likewise Dublin headquartered. Air Lease Corporation, founded in Los Angeles, conducts major operations through Ireland. The pattern repeats itself down the list. So how did a small island nation with a population of just over 5 million people become the landlord of the global aviation industry? Well, for 3 reasons, and they stack on top of each other beautifully. Firstly, the tax rate. Ireland's corporate tax rate sits at 12.5% for trading income, one of the lowest in the developed world. When you're managing assets worth hundreds of billions of dollars, even a few percentage points of tax difference translates to hundreds of millions saved annually. Secondly, the treaty network. Ireland has double taxation agreements with over 70 countries. In practical terms, this means that when an airline based in Brazil, or Thailand, or Nigeria leases a plane from an Irish-based company, taxes withheld on those lease payments are dramatically reduced or eliminated entirely. Without those treaties, airlines could be paying up to 30% extra on every monthly payment in cross-border withholding taxes. On a $600,000 monthly lease, that is up to $180,000 a month in added cost. Ireland's treaty network makes that disappear. Thirdly, the origin story. In 1975, a young Irish aviation executive named Tony Ryan was handed a problem. Aer Lingus had 2 Boeing 747s it had no use for. Ryan figured out how to lease them. That act of creative problem solving eventually became Guinness Peak Aviation, or GPA, the company widely credited with inventing the modern aircraft leasing industry. Ryan would later also found Ryanair, Europe's largest airline. 1 man, 2 industries, not bad for a day's work. GPA's success seeded an entire ecosystem within Ireland. The talent, the legal expertise, the regulatory familiarity, the institutional knowledge. When GPA alumni went on to found or run other leasing companies, they mostly stayed in Dublin because the infrastructure was already there. 50 years later, the cluster effect is so entrenched that moving out of Ireland would mean moving away from the deepest pool of aviation finance expertise on the planet. Leasing sounds clean and elegant until something breaks. When COVID hit in 2020, airlines worldwide begged for mercy. Fleets were grounded, routes were suspended, revenues collapsed to near zero overnight. The leasing companies, the invisible landlords, held the contracts. When airlines couldn't pay, lessors had the legal right to repossess the aircraft. Some deals were renegotiated, some aircraft were quietly taken back. The power dynamic was starkly clear. Airlines operate the planes, lessors own them. Then, in February 2022, Russia brutally invaded Ukraine, and the aircraft leasing industry discovered a new kind of nightmare. Western lessors owned more than 500 commercial aircraft that were on lease to Russian airlines at the time of the invasion. When sanctions hit and Russia refused to return the jets, those planes were simply stranded inside the country. Over 400 aircraft remain there today. Outstanding insurance and ownership claims top $8 billion. London's High Court ruled in favour of the lessors in 2025, but litigation timelines mean many of those claims will drag on for years. The system works elegantly in normal times. In abnormal times, it reveals that physical control of a plane and legal ownership of a plane are two very different things. The landlords of the sky found out what landlords on the ground already know. Getting your property back is not always as simple as the contract suggests. Here's what is easy to miss in all of this. The leasing model is not a workaround. It's not a financial trick. It's not an accounting gimmick. It is the reason cheap flights exist. The global aircraft leasing market was valued at around $187 billion in 2024 and is projected to reach over $350 billion by 2030. That is not a niche industry, that's infrastructure. When an airline doesn't need to spend $15 billion buying a fleet, it can spend that money lowering fares, opening new routes, on operational efficiency and growth. Indigo did not become one of the world's largest airlines because it had more capital than everyone else. It became huge precisely because it didn't need the capital. The same logic explains why Frontier Airlines in the United States doesn't own a single aircraft it operates, or why even legacy carriers like American Airlines run roughly half their mainline fleet on leases. The asset-light model is not for struggling airlines, it's for smart ones. AerCap, SMBC, Avalon, Air Lease. These companies collectively control about 30% of the world's entire leased fleet in 2024. They are the silent infrastructure of modern aviation. The logos change, the routes change, the fare sales and loyalty programs and the cabin redesigns change. The planes, underneath it all, belong to someone else entirely. And that someone else is probably sitting in an office in Dublin right now, watching a spreadsheet that tracks 1,600 aircraft scattered across every continent, doing the maths on where to place the next one. Next time you board a flight, look around. The seat, the overhead bin, the little window with 2 layers of plastic. There's a good chance the airline whose app you use to check in doesn't actually own any of what you're looking at. It belongs to a company in a city you may never visit, operating under a tax treaty you've never read, enforced by contracts that run to hundreds of pages. Aviation is one of the most glamorous industries in the world on the surface. And underneath the surface, it runs the same logic as a used car dealership. The planes don't belong to the airlines. That's not a flaw in the system, that might be the whole point. If you made it this far, thank you so much, you're a legend. Hope you enjoyed this dive into a different side of the aviation industry. If you've got any comments or requests for future videos, then please do drop them below. And in the meantime, I think you might love watching this video next.